Welcome to episode 180 of the Ski Podcast, and thanks for joining us, listener. Today is going to be a special episode all about working in ski resorts. We're going to be finding out what jobs are available, how you can find them, when to apply, what you can expect, and sadly, we're going to include a detailed look at the B word, Brexit, how that's had a huge impact on seasonal work for staff and employers. Now, my name is Ian Martin. I'd like to introduce my guests today. They're all experts in this topic. Firstly, I'm delighted to welcome Steph Davidson, who coordinates recruitment for the tour operator Loze. Hi, Steph. How are you?
Hi, Ian. Yeah, very well, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for joining us. Whereabouts are you today?
So I'm in Leeds at the moment. We're just down the road from our UK office, which is based in Huddersfield. So I am working at home today, but normally I would be in the UK office and very busy, taking calls from applicants, reading application forms and doing interviews, which we've just started recently as well.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll come on to the timeline for that sort of thing. We've also got with us today Jenny Greenwood, who performs the same role, I think, for Skiworld, the largest independent ski tour operator in the UK. Hi, Jenny. How are you going?
Hi, Ian. I'm really good, thank you. Really good. Yeah, I'm actually the HR manager for Skiworld, and I've been with them for 16 years. So, I've got a team that work for me doing recruitment. So I've got quite a wealth of experience in this subject.
Excellent. And covering, a period of time that includes lots of different changes within the industry. Whereabouts are you today, Jenny?
I'm in Twickenham.
Lovely area. I used to live there myself. Well, joining us from the Alps, we have Richard Lett from Après-Ski Bands and a number of other businesses. His colleague Ella was on the show in 178 telling us about Après-Ski bars. And Rich was last with us back in episode 86. Hi, Rich. How are you?
Yeah, very well. How are you, Ian? Are you good?
I am very well. You are in the Alps, I said. Whereabouts are you?
So currently sat based in Méribel. We work across the Alps in Switzerland and a little bit in Austria as well. But we also run a bar restaurant in Méribel Village called La Terrasse and Loze Village, which is where I'm sat this morning. Just had morning debriefing with the guys and morning coffees. We haven't started on the beer yet, but it's nearly midday.
That's a relief. It's more like pastis at this time of day in France.
Yeah,
sometimes, isn't it?
Nearly past 8 o'clock. So I suppose for this podcast, I think maybe I bring a perspective from local French business, because obviously we are just a French business out here. And obviously a lot of our colleagues and friends are French business owners, so French employment, as well as I suppose we could talk about the musicians, because they're a special case in employment as well.
Yep, we will definitely tackle that as well. That's great. Just tell us, Rich, how's the view today? How's it look out on the mountains?
It's gorgeous. It's been sunny for us on and off solidly. I've been back off holiday for a couple of weeks now, so and there is some rain due later, but I can't see it yet. It's gorgeous out there.
Okay, excellent. And finally, for a full house this morning, we don't normally have this many people on the podcast, but there's a lot to discuss here. And I really wanted to have Charlie Owen on. He is the MD of SBiT, which stands for Seasonal Businesses in Travel. It does what it says on the tin, and we'll be finding out more about exactly what SBiT is lobbying for. Hi, Charlie. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Ian. Very nice to be here. I was just checking. It's been 172 episodes since the last time I was on here. So very nice to be here, but also says a lot about the longevity of your podcast. So well done.
Thanks very much. Yes, I think we're going into our sixth year. I have to look it up. Now, quick question. I always like to ask my guests this, and I'm guessing that most people are going to be saying something that's a few months ago. But when did you last ski or snowboard? Let's have a quick answer from you, Steph. When and where was that?
Yeah, so that was in Courchevel. My last ski was in April. It was actually the best skiing of the season. We got a massive dump of snow right at the end. So then when we went into shutting down the chalets, I was quite jealous of all the locals who were still getting up to the top after the lifts have shut. But it was a really good season, lots of fantastic skiing. As I say, April was definitely a highlight. So lots of nice memories back to that.
Yeah, I was actually looking at the webcam for Celia yesterday. And, there's enough snow if you wanted to ski tour up to Celia and ski down, that you can still do it. And there were some tracks on the webcam. What about yourself, Jenny, when you were last on snow?
I was mid-April. I was in Vallees on the Skiworld end of season trip, which was a thank you to the staff. for the season, and we went out, the London staff went out to meet the overseas team management, and we had an amazing, as you say, Steph, amazing snow and an amazing end of season get together. Really good fun.
Excellent. What about yourself, Rich? You're in the Alps. Maybe it was a bit later than everyone else. I don't know. Yeah. I know you're a very busy man. You don't get on the mountain that much.
Well, I get out enough. It was in May. Did a little ski tour around the back of Monterey and down into Méribel. There was great snow towards the end of the season, wasn't there? Echoing what Steph said, April was a great month for skiing.
And Charlie, what about yourself?
Similar to the others, I was enjoying the phenomenal end of snow sea conditions. So the last time I was on, it was a board coming down my usual last favourite run down the Salere mid-April. And it's one of the things that I don't think is actually that well understood in the UK, that April now, and this has been the case for the last few years, has just provided the most phenomenal conditions. The slopes are reasonably empty, and the snow's just been great. So, part of me says it's probably just carry on to have such good ski in April, but it'd be nice if more UK holiday makers could actually appreciate it as well.
Sure. I mean, skiing into spring is a campaign that France Montagne has run for several years, and there's lots of great reasons for going out at that time of year. I think people often are thinking about altitude, but if you're going to somewhere like the Three Vallees, where I think three of you had your last ski, particularly you mentioned Salere, nice north-facing slope there. That's why it's still keeping that snow so well. It can definitely be a great holiday. Regular listeners will know that the Ski Podcast is sponsored by Lett. It's the largest ski area in the world. A couple of episodes ago, we had Chris Moran telling us about mountain biking over there. But in a few weeks' time, the most famous bike race in the world, the Tour de France, will be passing from Moutier up via Courchevel Le Praz, Tania, Méribel Village, and then over the Col de la Loze, which is the highest point on this year's tour at 2,304 metres, before going down into Courchevel and finishing at the altiport. Now, our Courchevel expert, Alex Irwin from 150 Days of Winter, sent us a short report on the build-up to the tour's arrival. So let's have a listen to that.
Hi Iain, Alex from 150 Days of Winter with a Tour de France update from Courchevel. On Wednesday, July the 19th, stage 17 of the Tour de France finishes in Courchevel for the first time since 2005, when Alejandro Valverde was handed the win by Lance Armstrong. If you're coming to Courchevel to watch the tour, here are some tips. If you're thinking about watching from the villages, the tour only passes through the lower villages of Saint-Bon, Le Praz and La Tania before heading over to Méribel. It then heads up the Col de la Loze, where the stage finished last year, another great viewing point, but requires quite a hike to reach, before heading down to the Courchevel altiport. The final descent is full of hairpin turns and changing aspects, which could easily catch up both cyclists and support cars. With a large screen installed at the finish at the top of the mountain runway, this is obviously one of the best places to watch the whole race, as well as the tumultuous finish. With all that in mind, it's best to find your viewing place early and be aware of road closures if you're thinking of driving on the day.
Rich, you mentioned that you are in Méribel Village at the moment, and the Tour de France is going to go right past your door. I'm guessing you will be watching, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is at La Terrasse in Méribel Village. It'll be kind of a festive day. The tour goes right by us on the road there that links La Tania to Méribel, and then it goes up through Méribel, winding its way up past the Rond Point, if people know that, and then they're onto this amazing track that they've built up there for road cycling, which is closed to cars normally. I mean, obviously the whole Tour de France is closed to cars anyway, but for us amateur cyclists, it's just such an amazing track that they've built. A tarmac road basically snakes its way all the way up to the Col de la Loze. And so the Col de la Loze is one of the peaks that joins Méribel to Courchevel. And then, so the Tour de France will be following that. They don't finish at the top. They finish down at the altiport in Courchevel. So there's going to be for those of you who know this road that they've built, it's quite hairy. There's very, very tight hairpins. It's very steep, and it's quite a technical descent. So it would be quite the thing to watch live, I should imagine, as well as on telly. But yeah, then they finish in the Courchevel altiport. And so Méribel isn't really doing anything for the Tour de France because technically the stage finish is Courchevel, but it's, most of it is on the Méribel side.
And what about yourself? It's going to come right past the Loze de Village. Will you have put on anything special for it?
Yeah, we'll have live music all day and barbecues and, that sort of party atmosphere with a big screen, and people in camper vans will probably be coming up and using this as a place to stay. So there'll be quite a lot of people here. But once midday comes, all the roads will be closed. So where people will be picking their zone and sticking to it. And from here, you can walk up to the track and see them going past. You can see them going past the front door here, or further up on the hill if you want to watch it on the mountain.
Yeah, and I know you're a keen cyclist, Rich. In fact, very kindly, you've lent me your bike before for an event I did out in the Alps. Have you cycled up Col de Loze yourself?
Oh yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. It's so difficult. It's so tough. The Méribel side is particularly tough. So you normally warm up in a cycling season with a trip up the Courchevel side first. You get that one under your belt, and then and the first time I did it, I literally couldn't do it without putting my foot down and because I thought my heart was going to come out my head. It's just, there's parts where you just cannot rest, and if these guys just float up it, the pro cyclists, but for an amateur cyclist, it is literally challenge one is getting up it without having to put your foot down. That is literally, it's that difficult.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, it's certainly going to be a day to watch. I'm pretty sure it's July the 19th that it's coming through, stage 17 of the Tour de France. So stick that one in your diaries. Hopefully I won't get in trouble for that segment about cycling, because someone did actually complain. We had mountain biking in episode 178, and we're the ski podcast. I'm not apologising for that. We all love skiing, but the mountains, for me, at any time of year, are a joy. And in summer, cycling is hugely popular, as is trail running. Regular listeners will know I like my trail running. I'm going to be in Zermatt in August for a race they've got over there. And last weekend, I was actually taking part in a triathlon down in Nice. And I might be risking more complaints now because this is like a non-ski or even mountain activity, although we did cycle up into the Préalpes. But I'm mentioning this purely because I travelled there and back by train. And I went on the overnight service from Paris to Nice on the way out there. Regular listeners will know about the lobby group I founded, Ski Flight Free. And although this wasn't to a ski resort, if you'd like to know more about my overnight train experience, you can have a look at skiflightfree.org to find out more about that. Right, we're going to move on to the main subject of the day now, which is ski jobs and finding work in ski resorts. And Charlie, I'd like to start with you. We might as well address, I don't think it's the elephant in the room, because everybody knows that Brexit has made huge changes to Britain, but specifically in terms of freedom of movement. So, Charlie, I wondered if you could tell us firstly a little bit about SBiT, what SBiT is, and when it started and why you started it.
Sure. Look, just before I kick on that, just go back. Thank you again for inviting me on, but thank you for everything you do for the industry, particularly on the climate emergency and looking at flight-free skiing. I think it is going to be incredibly important. And look, I've talked before about how the lack of mobility is really challenging for the entire industry, but that pales in comparison to the existential crisis that the climate emergency brings. So look, thank you for everything you do on that, and please keep doing it. But look, back to the question and SBiT and a little bit about how we started. I think the seeds of it started on the night of the referendum, where I stayed up all night, not ashamed to say, drank a bit, cried a bit. When I'd kind of got over the hangover and kind of brushed the tears away, realised that the potential for the loss of freedom of movement and basically labour mobility between the UK and the EU was going to provide probably the most significant challenge that the industry had faced up until that point. And I kind of kicked myself that actually myself personally and the industry wider hadn't done more in the lead up to the referendum about trying to explain what some of those impacts would be. So SBiT was set up for two reasons. A, to raise awareness of the potential impacts of the loss of mobility on the UK ski industry, and to lobby both European and UK governments to actually allow mobility to continue in the travel industry, to allow all of us and the industry to carry on doing what we do, and providing phenomenal value holidays to British holiday makers, whether it's skiing holidays or summer holidays.
Yeah, cool. So that makes a lot of sense. And, I particularly wanted to have you on the show. I know we had you on the show as long as ago. You mentioned it. It was January 2018. I looked it up. Episode 8 of the podcast, which does mean that we started in September 2017. But recently you produced an excellent, fascinating report, sadly full of what you have to consider to be negative news, really, in conjunction with ABTA, which just shows the impact that Brexit has had on the industry in terms of seasonal work already. A reduced number of jobs available, reduced number of young people working, and leading to the reduced number of chalets. I wondered if you'd like to elaborate on that, how you teamed up with ABTA, why you decided to release this now, and some of the contents of that.
Yes. So actually, this is the fourth report that SBiT has released on this subject. Kind of précis the first three. In 2017, we released a report that said the industry was at risk of losing large amounts of jobs and decreasing in size. 2018, we said we're still at risk of exactly the same thing unless a mobility deal is done. 2019, we said exactly the same thing again. And then COVID hit. And obviously, we all had individual challenges, but the industry faced as a whole faced a phenomenal challenge. Hopefully now COVID is behind us. We thought it was time to go back and say, look, what happened to all the predictions that we made in the previous three reports? And then I've been working very closely with ABTA, who obviously have been also calling out the dangers of the lack of mobility chapter in the EU-UK trade agreements. And so we decided to partner together to resurvey the industry to find out what the situation actually was. And as you say, unfortunately, the three reports that we said, look, this is going to be really, really bad, was then confirmed by the report that we just released, which basically said, yes, it's really bad. So some of the headlines, there's been a 69% drop in UK workers in the EU from 2017 to now. And we were already seeing a drop in 2017 because the result of the referendum, many people in the industry saw the risk. So we'd already seen a bit of a drop. So it's now under 4,000 UK workers that are working in the EU in the travel industry. 64, and the survey, it was quite wide. We had over 120 respondents, of which over 100 were CEOs or MDs in the travel industry. So it's a fairly significant number. 64% of all respondents said the cost per employee has increased more than 30% since 2017. There's been a 56% reduction in catered chalets across the whole of Europe. And in some countries, it's quite extreme. For instance, in Austria, there is virtually no UK travel industry presence because it is incredibly complex, and there's a quota system for allowing UK workers to work. So, yeah. And then finally, the last stat, 78% of all MDs and CEOs say Brexit will have a more long-term significant impact than even COVID. Only 10% thought COVID was more significant.
Yeah, I mean, I find all of that really interesting. Firstly, you started off thanking me for the kind of lobbying I'm doing on climate change. And in some respects, the way that you've been producing your reports is kind of a bit similar to the IPCC. It's kind of saying, hey, look, there's a risk. Hey, look, there's still a risk. Hey, look, there's a risk and it's getting bigger if we don't do anything about it. And now we've got this situation, unfortunately, where, I mean, that is such a huge decrease in the number of people working in ski resorts. And I'm guessing probably everyone on the panel today, on the podcast today, is in the same situation as me, because I've been working in the ski industry for a long time. I often get contacted by people who are saying, oh, you know, my son, my friend, etc., wants to get a ski job. How do they go about it? And my first question to them these days is, well, you know, have you got an EU passport? Because what you're saying there, the number of jobs overall has gone down. But isn't that another factor as well? I think I saw that in your report. The number of non-British passport holders employed by British companies has gone up.
Yeah, that's definitely been the case. And we were talking about this, and we predicted this would happen because it is very complex and quite expensive to actually employ UK staff in some countries. Then the natural response is to look to employ some more EU passport holders. So particularly people from Ireland have been under quite high demand. Now, fortunately, SBiT has worked incredibly closely with the French authorities. We've been doing this since 2017. We managed to raise awareness of the success of the UK ski industry and how beneficial it was to the local French economies. And through that close collaboration, not only is SBiT been recognised by the French government as the official voice of the UK ski industry in France, but we've managed to work with them to provide a route to employ UK staff. However, it is there is quite a bit of bureaucracy, and it does quite cost a bit more. However, there is a route. Without that, then even the 3,700 UK worker number would be significantly less.
Okay, well, we will come on to that route later. And I also, later on in the podcast, want to ask you about some of the lobbying that you're doing, because I know you're lobbying on a very high level. But let's try and be a little positive about it. There are still jobs available in resorts, maybe less than in the halcyon days of chalet companies and ski jobs. I'd like to bring in Steph and Jenny at this point. I wondered if we could start off. Steph, you work for Le Ski. You're a specialist chalet company. Know that I work with Le Ski quite closely, and I know that you've really focused on just maintaining those chalets. You know, there are a lot of hoops that you have to go through, but you've made that happen. So can I just start off then by asking, what kind of jobs are still available for people to apply for? What kind of jobs are on offer?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's probably helpful if I start by telling you a little bit more about Le Ski. So as you said, we're a chalet company. We run catered chalet holidays in France. So those are in 3 resorts that we have, Courchevel and Tania, which are in the 3 Vallees, and then Vallees as well. So we're very lucky, actually, that we've managed to maintain our programme of 31 chalets. Nothing has changed for us since COVID and Brexit. Obviously, there's been a lot of hard work to maintain that. We've got excellent relationships with our, property owners, suppliers, everything like that, and our staff. So we've managed to maintain our programme, which is great, so that we can carry on providing those jobs and opportunities for people. So we actually employ over 70 overseas staff every year. Most of those staff are chalet hosts, so I can explain to you a little bit about what that job involves. It's quite a varied position. So we would assign a chalet host to a property. They'd look after it and make it a home from home for guests for the week. So doing everything cooking, so cook breakfast, afternoon tea, canapes in the evening, and a 3-course evening meal as well. Housekeeping aspects for the role as well. Slightly less glamorous side. People like to talk about the cooking a lot, but they forget there's a lot of hard work behind the scenes as well. So doing the bits of housekeeping, and then of course entertaining the guests during the dinner party atmosphere in the evening. It's a really lovely atmosphere, and the staff make it really special and memorable for the guests in that respect. We've also got resort managers. So we have chalet managers. They tend to be somebody who's progressed from being a chalet host. So we do retain quite a lot of our staff, which is great, and come on to be managers. So that's, for skills in terms of staff coming back home after doing a season. It's really great to have that managerial experience. And I've sort of gone through that system myself as well into a full-time job too. But these chalet managers in resort, they are overseeing all of the operations for the chalets. So again, a lot of behind the scenes things, ordering food, checking the standards in the chalets, making the rotas for the staff, managing their hours and things like that. So that's the chalet side of things. And we also have guest services managers. That was my area, so that's where I've come from.
Can I just ask, is that a modern term for what I understood to be a rep? A guest services manager?
Possibly, yes, I suppose so. I mean, our company is a little bit different. A lot of companies sort of run entertainment and things like that. Our guest service managers are more sort of there to advise guests. So I'd often, when I did it, go into the chalets in the morning, chat to the guests, see where they're going. Can I book any restaurants for them? Give any recommendations? Things like that. That's the glamorous side to the role. There was an element of if something goes wrong, that was me who would step in, or the guest service managers who do it now. So injuries, as you know, skiing is a little bit of a high risk sport. So if anything goes wrong on the mountain, the guest service managers are there to help out in those situations. So we have those sorts of roles as well. Like I say, those positions tend to be somebody who's got a bit of experience before, perhaps worked for the previous season and progressed into those roles. And then we have a couple of positions which are sort of behind the scenes. I think when you go on holiday, you don't even realise that these things are going on. That's the way we like it. It means that it's running smoothly, that we have sort of maintenance positions, looking after things in the chalets if anything sort of isn't working, anything from a light bulb to a boiler or anything like that. That's what the maintenance would look after. Resort support, we have that position. They deliver all of the food from shopping, the wine, keeping those things topped up in the chalets so that the service is really smooth for the guests. So like I say, those behind the scenes positions, which are so important to our operations, but from a guest perspective, you hope that those things wouldn't even sort of be noticed in a way. And of course, some admin positions and things like that as well. So quite a variety.
Cool. Okay, that's great, Steph. Jenny, can I ask you a similar question? I know Skiworld, larger company, lots of chalets as well. How many staff do you employ, and is it similar roles? Are there any other roles in addition to that?
We are double the amount of staff. We're probably last year we were 160 staff, and we're looking to grow this year, so we're still working on the numbers for this coming season. But yeah, our program is quite a bit bigger and quite a few more chalets. With regards to actual roles, I think Steph's covered the majority of the roles. We do have more sort of a year-round support because we're putting the program together, focusing on training. So we do have some year-round positions that are actually based overseas as well, and things like area managers that oversee the resort managers. So there is a sort of a slightly larger structure there for us.
And so leading on to, we discussed what type of roles are available. When would you say is the best time to start applying? Say someone's listening to this podcast now and they're thinking, right, okay, that sounds interesting. I've probably got the skills for that. So the winter doesn't start until December. So when would you recommend, Jenny, that people should be putting in their applications?
As soon as possible. We open up our recruitment from June. Our first port of call is to speak to the returning staff, and we usually have about 35% of the staff wanting to come back year on year, which is great considering people sometimes look at that as a gap year. But because of the visa process and the permit process, the sooner we can get that underway, the better. So I would definitely say start applying as soon as the jobs go onto the website, which is usually June after we've placed the returners in May.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And Steph, can I come back to you? Similar timings, would you say?
Absolutely, yeah. So myself, Alex and Zoe, we're the full-time team for Le Ski. We actually are based out in France during the winter, and we get back sort of the very beginning of May. So we do have a little bit of a break before we delve straight into the next season. But as same for Jenny, we start reopening the recruitment process beginning of June. And we do want those applications in as soon as possible so we can get all the paperwork sorted.
And what is that timeline then? If you're encouraging people to start applying, let's say in June, you end up getting like a big pile of applications. What's going to help someone's application to get them to the top of that list and get them presumably to an interview? That's the next stage, is it?
Absolutely, yeah. So basically with Le Ski, I read all of the applications, and there are a lot of applications, very competitive. Over the summer, we get over 1,000. So basically, when I'm going through the applications, I'm looking for specific job roles. Have they got the relevant skills? As I mentioned, most of our positions are chalet host roles. For somebody in that, I'm looking, the cooking aspect is a big part of it. So have they potentially done a chalet cookery course? Those are provided from various different schools. Things like that really boost an application. Also, any relevant experience. Have they done hospitality roles before? Things like that. And also bearing in mind that we are taking applications in June, I'm very happy to sort of, if somebody has said, I've got a job lined up and during the summer I'll be working full time, or I'm seeking relevant experience in hospitality, that would be really good to know that they will be ready to go for the start of the season with that experience.
Cool. That makes a lot of sense. That's great. I'm going to come back to you, Jenny, if that's okay. I wondered, when do you start interviewing people then? If you've got applications coming in June, when does that process start? And is that regional, or do people all come to your offices?
As soon as the applicants come in, we start to process them. Our first port of call is we call them, we have a chat with them. Usually takes about 20 to 30 minutes just to get a really good flavour of their background and talk through their CV. And then we invite them to interview. That's could be face-to-face. Some tour operators do face-to-face. We are this summer doing face-to-face now. COVID's calmed down slightly. And we also offer Zoom or on Teams if people are in different parts of the country or in different countries themselves. And then as soon as we've done the interview, within a week, they'll know whether they've got the position. But just wanted to add to what Steph had mentioned there about, the number of applicants. And we have over 5,000, we had this last season, just over 5,000 applications. And I just want to put a bit of context with the number of roles that we have. That only equates to being able to offer out 3.4% of those applicants with a position. And if you take out then returners out of that who are coming back, you're looking at 2.7%. So just to emphasize what Steph said about, the experience, what's on your CV, the recruitment process, it's so important that they really sell themselves and do the research into the business, because when you're faced with 5,000 CVs, what's going to stand out when you know that you could potentially only recruit 3.4% of those maximum?
Yeah, well, that is definitely a valid point. And if it hadn't underlined before how important an application is when you're completing it, it does now. Steph, in relation to your interviews, I think I'm right in saying that you have like a regional aspect to that. Is that right?
Not so much anymore. Things did change since COVID, really. So, like Jenny said, you'll sort of move back to face-to-face. We've changed our recruitment a little bit since COVID. So I conduct a first stage interview, which is over Zoom, and then our second stage interview is over Zoom as well. We're quite a small family-run company in Huddersfield. Quite out the way of a lot of people. We found a lot of people are traveling and things as well. So we tried to make it convenient, and it does work for us well over Zoom. Quite a few people that I've spoken to recently who have been applying for jobs at various companies have asked me, do you do an assessment day? I'm not too sure which companies still operate those, but some companies, larger companies, will ask people to go to, a centre for a day and do sort of various sort of activities, I suppose, or interview stages. I'm not too sure how they work, but for ourselves, it's just one-to-one.
Right. Okay. And if you're offering people a job, say you've interviewed them, you've narrowed them down, you've interviewed them, and you've decided, right, this is the right person for me. Steph, for yourself, you've got 3 resorts to offer. Jenny's got a significantly more. But for a question to both of you, really, to start with, Steph, at what point do you actually specify what resort people are going to be working in?
We obviously take into account people's preferences. I think people do come in with in mind where they'd like to be. A lot of people have looked at our chalets that we offer as well and have sort of said, I like the look of this one. We absolutely take into account people's preferences. However, myself, Alex and Zoe, who have worked for Le Ski for a number of years, sort of around 20 seasons between us, know every property inside out, and we know what kind of skill set we need for certain chalets, how much experience for different ones, they range in size. So how capable is that candidate and will they suit that property?
Cool. And what about yourself, Jenny? You're offering employment in a lot of different resorts in several countries. I'm sure people have their preferences, but do you actually tell them where they're going to be working when you make them an offer?
Yeah, I mean, we've got 10 resorts. And so, we know our product extremely well, and we try and go out and see as much of the property as we can. For us, the way I train my team to do it is listening to what the applicant actually wants. But actually, sometimes we know probably what's going to suit them better when we're building communities and putting people together that are going to live together, work together, play together. It's really important that we get to know that individual, and therefore it's also finding out what type of skiing they like, off-piste, park, and then sort of tailoring the resort to the person. But they know the resort they're going to go to before they go in the area.
Yeah, I mean, I love this conversation because, like probably a lot of our listeners and certainly everyone on the panel, I did a bunch of seasons myself. And you're saying, what type of skiing do you like? Well, the type of skiing you like before you go to do your first season can be completely different from what it is by the time you've finished that season. But it's certainly true that the community out in resort is incredibly important to you when you're working a season. But those jobs, they don't actually start. I'm going to say December is when ski resorts open. But Steph, when would you actually send your staff out to resort? I presume there's a training week to start off with, is there?
Exactly, yeah. So again, this is since COVID actually, but we've started doing our manager training in the UK. So we do that middle of November. That works really well for us and is something we've kept since COVID. And then after that, we go out to resorts, and it varies on resorts. So Val d'Isère starts a little bit earlier, so that's the very end of November. And then the 3 Valleys we start, it's usually the first week of December we head out there. So we sort of stagger our training.
Cool. And Jenny, similar timings for Skiworld?
Yeah, it's mid-November. We do online training prior to them going out. They get videos that they can watch. It takes away all that theory, and they can keep revisiting it before they go out, get that confidence. And then training is actually the practical in resorts. So management usually go out first, about 2 weeks training from mid-November, and then the staff go out from then onwards go straight to resort to train.
Excellent. It's very exciting. I bet there's someone listening right now who's getting excited about doing a potential ski season. Well, I've got some more questions for you, Steph and Jenny, a bit later on. But thank you very much for that contribution just now. I'd just like to move on to Rich and Charlie now then, to have a little discussion about bar jobs, because I know this is a specialist area for you. Regular listeners might know that I founded a business called Natives, and we actually specialised in recruitment for ski resorts and for British ski companies. For 12 winters, before I left the company, we helped all sorts of people find jobs. And what never changed across every single one of those seasons is that the most common application was from an 18-year-old boy who said, I want to work in a bar in a ski resort. And there aren't so many of those jobs. But Charlie, you manage a few bars in the Alps, I believe. What's the situation now? Are you recruiting British bar staff to work in those?
Yes. So I obviously have a couple of hats. So I'll take the SBiT hat off and put my European Pubs hat on as the MD of European Pubs. So we manage Jack's in Méribel. We operate the Grand Jets Hotel also in Méribel, and the Capinias both in Méribel and Courchevel. And we'll be opening a new Jack's in Leyman Weir this coming season, which we're very excited about, which will provide more job opportunities. So at European Pubs, we employ both UK staff and EU passport holders and encourage applications for experienced hospitality staff in the UK. And obviously, this is when my dual roles of SBiT and European Pubs actually really comes into its own and benefits our employees, because we've got a very good idea of how to navigate the new legal landscape that you need to get the right work permits and visas, which is critical to make sure that the staff are employed legally and that they aren't running risks with their own ability to travel in the future. So we've probably got about 60 to 70 vacancies that we need to recruit to fill this year. Recruitment is in full swing already. So if you want an experience that literally will change your life, and I know that I think everybody on this podcast has done winter seasons and will know the life-changing experience it is, then get applying at europeanpubs.com. Go and have a look at what we do and get your applications in. Shameless.
Yeah. There's pros and cons of working in a bar for sure. I think the hours are much more suitable for skiing and getting on the mountain, because often you're working in the evening, but then you're behind the bar. But you get to meet everyone as well. Rich, you're sitting in a bar in the Alps at the moment, and you recruit for Loze de Village, I believe. I think you are more focused on employing people with EU passports now. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, Charlie's company, they've got to employ more people. So that we out of the 25 or so staff last year, we only had one member of staff on a UK visa, and that's someone that's worked for us for a number of years, and she missed the boat getting settled status because she was on a boat in the working on a yacht at the time. So she didn't get her carte de séjour or settled status in UK terms. So she missed that. So she's someone we valued, and so we went through the visa process for her. Fairly straightforward. There's the French visa website. It's very well set up for it. You click on it and it's all in English. Just got to follow the process. And then we do recruit people locally, French people, English kids that have been born out here. We've got a couple of them on the team that are, 18, 19 years of age, and so have that, have great English and great French as well. So in all, with carte de séjour holders and EU passport holders, it was 99% of our workforce.
Can I ask you another question? Like Charlie, you wear a lot of hats. Après-Ski Bands is one of your businesses. You mentioned that there's a situation in terms of acts coming over who are going to be performing in different bars around the Alps. How does that work for them in terms of employment?
Yeah, so if there's any budding musicians out there want to sign up with us, it is different for musicians and sports people. So those are careers where you expect people to go to other countries to do what they do. So musicians do get a certain amount of time without needing any kind of visa whatsoever. So there's a few administrative hoops to jump through, and you also need to show a contract which has your future dates in terms of music gigs and income, to prove that you have the money coming in during that tour. So you don't need a visa up to 90 days, and then post 90 days you have to get a visa. But even then, the visa is a lot simpler than a bar person's visa. It's called a talent passport, and beyond 90 days, it's a simple application. And I mean, touch wood, up until last season, everybody that went for their visa interview got a visa within a couple of weeks, and the process was much, much simpler.
Okay, excellent. So that's good news. So that if you're an act, you can contact Rich if you want to be working out in the Alps this winter and it's still possible. I'd like to just come back to Jenny and Steph, if I could, just to touch on EU passport holders. The SBiT survey showed that there's a lot more EU passport holders being employed. Steph, are you actively seeking out EU passport holders, or is that something that when you see all those application forms come in, those 1,000 application forms, you're like putting them into different piles? If you see someone who's got that passport already?
Interestingly, not so much. So our priority is just getting the right candidates for the job. As I've sort of explained, we know specifically what we need for each chalet, each resort, what works well. So when I'm going through each application, I'm just judging people's suitability for it, really. Obviously, we've explained the benefits for having the EU passports, but there is a way to get UK and British passport holders out to France with visas. So we've sort of been doing that. It's definitely a bonus if they do have it. It bypasses the admin and the costs. But my priority is finding the right person for the job.
Okay, and Jenny, what about yourself? Charlie mentioned it's been Brexit has been a bonus for Irish people. Are you employing more Irish or other EU citizens?
Again, with Steph, this is totally about it's candidate specific. We want to get the right person in the right role. Just to give an example from Skiworld's perspective, in 21-22, we employed 38% EU passport holders. But for the amazing work that SBiT have been doing over these last 2 years, for 22-23, it dropped down to 28%. For EU passport holders, because we can put people through the process, it's really about getting the right person for the right role. And I want to make sure that we deliver excellent service, and that outweighs the admin costs in my mind. Okay,
let's tackle that, because that was also in the SBiT report, and you're talking about the cost. There's a literal cost in terms of financial cost, but there's also a cost in time as well. Steph, do you want to talk us through how it works in terms of getting a visa for staff?
Absolutely, I can do. So obviously we just employ people in France, so I can only speak from that perspective. But yeah, lots of steps to sort of follow. Charles, thanks everything SBiT have done, because honestly, it is a long and complicated process, and I'm not sure that we would have known where to start with it, but it is possible. We have got our heads around it and done it successfully for a couple of years now, so that's great. But the first step is that you do have to advertise the jobs, as I say, on to the Pôle emploi, which is the French job site. So you open the applications, and it's 3 weeks that those jobs have to be posted for. You interview applicants if they apply. If somebody applies and they're great for the role, that's fantastic. We'll sort of consider that application alongside all of the others that we receive as well. But if not, we sort of go down the route of then opening the jobs up to, our UK market, which is where we get most of our staff from.
So to clarify then, you've posted the job to make it available to French people, in this instance in France, to apply, and then you have to wait a certain period of time before you're allowed to consider non-EU citizens. Charlie, do you want to elaborate on that at all?
Yes. So it's a local worker test, and it's fairly standard for non-EU countries that if you're trying to be, which of course the UK is now, getting workers to work over there. But what will commonly happen, and this is something that, and thanks very much to Steph and Jenny for kind of calling out what SBiT's been doing. We run regular workshops for the entire industry to help, or for SBiT members to help them navigate the legal landscape. So 3-4 weeks on the French unemployment side, but that's normally done in May, June time, kind of before the actual recruitment process starts in the UK. So it's a little bit of a lapse time. Fortunately, there's no cost associated with it, but there is a little bit of admin. We work very closely with the French authorities, and SBiT in 2018, we posted 7,000 chalet job advertisements on the Pôle emploi, and we guaranteed to the French authorities that we would employ anybody that successfully applied that met the right criteria through companies. We got 3 applications, 2 of which was spam, and 1 of which didn't speak English, so didn't pass the test. And it was kind of through that the French authorities saw that actually that for many, many reasons, there wasn't the availability in France of people to do the roles particularly in the chalet roles that the industry needed. And we are talking with the French authorities to see if there's any way that actually chalet jobs can be identified as something called métier en tension, in short supply, so that we can actually avoid actually having to put the roles onto the Pôle emploi. That said, and I know there are lots of companies that actually do get some applications now through the French unemployment sites and are actively looking to employ French citizens. And I'd really, really encourage it as well. But there aren't the level of jobs, which is why we've seen the amount of roles in the entire industry decrease so radically.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for that, Charlie. Steph, I've got another question for you then. So you've gone through all of this process, then you're applying for visas. You've made an offer to, let's say, British staff, and you're going through this process. You want the right people. You've applied for a work permit. You apply for a work visa. And then there's some validation process when that individual arrives in France as well. Is that how that works?
Absolutely. So just back to what you said about the work permit and the visa there. I think it's important to point out, because some people do call us and say they want to start, get ahead with the process and get the visa themselves. It's not something that people can just do on their own. The work permit specifically it's specific to the employee and the employer. So it's something that we as a company apply for the staff. After that, they go to a visa appointment. The first appointment is in the UK. So there are offices in London, Manchester and Edinburgh. That's through TLS. And we try to make the process as smooth as possible for the staff, so helping with the paperwork that they need. And like I say, we've got the work permit granted and things like that. But the staff do have to go along to that appointment in person, and there's a cost involved there. I'll just pass over to Charles if that's okay as well.
I'd just like to add something on the work permit process, because this was the one that we were really concerned about. And thankfully, with our close relationship with the French government, SBiT managed to get a guarantee that they would issue work permits to UK staff working in tourism.
Can I just clarify, though, Charlie, when they've got a working visa, they're out in the Alps, there's still a process that happens when they're in the Alps as well?
Correct. This is where it gets a little bit complicated, because it depends which route and which particular visa that you get. However, for the majority of UK seasonal staff, the company will apply for a work permit for them. They will then apply for a work visa to enter France on a temporary season visa, and then they have to get that visa validated in France. And this is where the costs and the time start to add up. First of all, the company needs to pay about 50 euros a month they're working, so 250 or 300 euros to be in France. They then need to go down and apply in the local prefecture for what's called a pluriannuel carte de séjour, which will allow that worker to come back and work for the next 3 years, 6 months in each year. They then need to actually get an off-fee medical certificate, which requires a chest x-ray and then an in-person interview with OFFI. So in total, this requires 3 trips out of resort to the local prefecture or the OFFI offices to apply, get the medical and pick up your carte de séjour.
Right. Okay. That is a pretty full-on process. Jenny, can I ask you a question? Charlie mentioned there are some costs attached to that. And obviously, there's an admin cost attached to that as well. But this is France that we're talking about, where in general, there has been this system that has been created thanks to the work of SBiT, where it is possible, although time-consuming, to employ British people to work in France. But you employ staff in Austria as well. And it's a lot more complicated or challenging in Austria, I believe.
Yeah, the system actually works very much the same as France. We still have to go through advertising roles. You still have to go through permits, visas. As Charlie mentioned at the very beginning with Austria, the challenge comes from the quota of permits that they'll issue. And whereby France, there isn't the quota, in the hospitality industry in Austria, there is, and it's very, very limited. And that's to all non-EU. So that would include Australians, Kiwis, Canadians, it's South Africans. So everyone is trying to go for these small numbers of permits that they issue. And that's where the challenge comes. And the process, it actually takes a lot longer than it does in France. You can take up to 3 months. So Skiworld have made the commercial decision that for the positions we have in Austria, we do employ EU staff, purely because that 3 months isn't practical when if there's an injury or something like that, we can't go through that process.
Yeah, I mean, that is really interesting because I also spoke to Andy Butterworth from Kaluma Ski, who's regularly contributed to the podcast and is based out in St Anton. And he told me that they employ around 30 staff in St Anton and they're all on EU passports. And he talked about the challenges of this quota system and how it's changing. There might be a certain number in December and then it changes in January, etc. So those logistical challenges are still there in those respects. Jenny, can I also ask you a quick question about packages? You know, when I did a ski season a very long time ago, I don't think rules were followed quite in the same way that they are these days. So staff just got their accommodation, their lift pass, and a nominal amount of money. But for quite a few years now, the system has been pretty different from that. So what can someone who's going out to work a season, for example, in a chalet or a rep, what can they expect to be paid within their package?
The main difference in the package and how people work is that they used to be paid on the UK system. So they would pay tax and national insurance in the UK. And now they're if they're working in France, they're on the French system on a French contract. And they're being paid the wage in France, plus they pay, obviously, the tax and their social charges in France. But the actual salary aspect of it is such a small part of the actual package. I mean, that's the remuneration. But obviously, there's huge amounts of benefit for staff to actually work a ski season. And it comes through things like, as Charlie mentioned, that they put together this report, and 49% of senior management, talked about their career and that they've done ski seasons and how it started their career. So there's so many different factors, and kind of obviously promotion. They're learning management skills. They're learning all these other elements. And it's life-changing. Some of the skills that they learn how to sell, they learn how to budget, they're learning accounting. It's huge life experiences, and they get ongoing coaching throughout.
Yeah, well, you don't have to sell it to me as someone who, first did a ski season and has run a few businesses since then. But I know, when I go to some of the industry networking events, pretty much everyone there who's in a senior role with ski companies has done a season, at some point. That has been part of it. And you learn on the front line, what's required and about the product and about the customer, etc. Steph, I've got one more question for you about the kind of package. Some of my friends who've done seasons, back in the day with me several decades ago have been saying to me, I hear that season workers these days only have to work a 35-hour week. Is that happen?
Contractually 35 hours. Within the sort of employment law, you can do bits of overtime, which is paid. And we do try and monitor and give sort of time off to compensate if they've gone over as well. So you can have sort of modulated contracts. That's something that you can do. It does also require a lot more sort of planning. So some companies have a rota system so that it doesn't affect the guests as much. So perhaps they'll have staff covering when the days off are for staff and things like that. Ski, we've taken the sort of decision because of the way that we operate, and we've got 31 chalets. It doesn't work for us to have that rota system. We'd have to, the financial implications of getting the staff to cover that would be far too great. So all of our staff have 2 days off during the week, all at the same time. And the guests use that as an opportunity to try one of the local restaurants, which actually seems to go down really well anyway.
I always think this is such a difficult ruling to put into practice, because anyone who's done worked in the industry within chalets would understand that early on, it takes much longer to do a job because you're learning how to do it. But once you get into a system and you know how to go about it later on, it won't take you as long. You're more efficient. But, unfortunately, we have to work our way around these admin things. So that's very interesting. Rich?
Yeah, I mean, that's a phenomenon in bars as well. You just do rolling hours sheets so that as the season goes on, the staff members recuperate overtime with extra days off on them, and when they all know they know their roles and they're working efficiently, it's great to give them an extra day off so they can go skiing,
Excellent.
Yeah, I just want to mention with the package, and obviously there's an implication to the company to do visas and permits. Can I just really iterate everybody that when they're applying for positions, that they check that the company is actually doing the correct visa and permit process? Because if they don't, the repercussions on that individual, it could be a long-term effect within Europe. So please research the company that you're about to work for. That's my advice for any applicant who's going to do a season.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've certainly, in the seasons that I did, people, did get deported for various reasons. Every now and then, controls happen and people would have to leave. And we're aware that, there's some employers who are not necessarily, doing it the right way. Charlie, I'd just like to come on to you because there's a lot of topics here that we're trying to tackle. But I just want to mention something that is in your report that you just did with ABTA and some of the lobbying that you're doing. I wondered if you could tell us briefly what the youth mobility scheme that you're lobbying for is.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. Because look, there's obviously been, I think, in a lot of this podcast, quite a bit of the issues which we've managed to navigate, but there is hope for the future. And this is what SBiT and ABTA are really, really focused on at the moment. So there's two things that we're lobbying for. Extending the existing UK youth mobility scheme to EU countries. So the UK already has a youth mobility scheme. So this allows people up to 18 to 34 to work in countries like Australia, Japan, New Zealand. We're looking to extend that to the EU nations, individual EU nations. And there's conversations going on at the moment around that. But secondly, we're seeking an enhanced seasonal mobility agreement for tourism workers, full stop, of whatever aged, with the EU. Now, we think this is most likely in the renegotiation of the EU-UK TCA Trade and Cooperation Agreement that will happen in 25-26. And I think there's quite a lot of support. And actually, if you look at the press coverage around the SBiT report, the Times actually called this out as something that was pragmatic and made sense. Even Lord Frost, I find myself in the very bizarre situation of agreeing with Lord Frost that actually just after he resigned in one of his first speeches, he said that they made an error in not actually having more mobility provisions within the TCA. And so I'm hopeful that either with this current government or future governments, that they will look at better mobility and particularly youth mobility scheme.
Rich?
Yeah, I would say if people are, looking for jobs this winter, there's also in each of the resorts, there are Facebook groups set up just, by barman and by whoever else. And they set them up each year, looking for staff, recruitment, Vallees there, 24, 20, 23, 24 or what have you. You just got to do a little search on the internet on these Facebook groups, and all the local employers, all the local hotels, bars, restaurants, etc. They post their jobs on there. And some of these local employers are large hotel groups that have admin departments and HR departments and can handle, visa applications. They're employing third-party nationals from other countries that aren't in the EU. So I'd say not to take applications away from the fine people in this podcast, but there are some alternatives out there as well.
Excellent. Well, that is really good. I like the idea that we can finish off on a positive note, but I don't want to kind of diminish the conversation we've had here. Doing a ski season is a tremendous experience. There might be fewer jobs out there, but that just means if you want to do one, listener, or if you know someone who wants to do one, make sure that you get as many qualifications or skills as you can and put in a high quality application. So people like Steph and Jenny will, take you to the next stage and to move on. Overall, very interesting conversation. And hopefully, listener, you found it interesting as well. Please do let me know what you think about the show. I enjoy all feedback about it. You can contact me via social at Ski Podcast or email theskipodcast@gmail.com. We also had a couple of contributions via buymeacoffee.com/the Ski Podcast. Richard Bond bought me coffee the other day. He also said, really enjoying the podcast, bucket list now overflowing. episode 200 beckons. I don't think that's going to happen for another year or so, but I will be thinking about it. And Doug also bought me a coffee. That's kind of him. A couple of comments from the Snowheads site. Richard Sideways really enjoyed episode 178. He'd never thought of Bosnia as a winter destination before, and he liked the biking as well. Robin liked the Bosnia one. And he also called Mike Richards the most travelled Welsh skier of all time, which I think he surely is. And he will definitely be on the podcast again, talking about some of the other destinations he's been to. Now, there are there's 180 episodes of the Ski Podcast now to catch up with. I had a quick look, and 126 were listened to in the last week. I see in analytics, most people are listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, but you can do it on your smart speaker as well. I tried that the other day. And I should let you know, listeners, that we now have stickers back in stock. So if you want a sticker for your helmet or your skis or your mountain bike or anything else like that, just let me know. Send me an email and I'll send them out to you. Now, you can follow me at Skipedia and the podcast at the Ski Podcast. But for now, I'd like to thank Les Vallees for sponsoring the show and thank my guest today, Jenny. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's been brilliant.
Steph, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Iain. Been a pleasure.
Rich, thanks for joining us from France.
Thanks, Iain.
And Charlie, really informative. Great to have you on the show and keep doing all the great work you're doing with SBiT.
Thank you very much. And hopefully it's not another 172 episodes before I come back on next time.
Well, hopefully you'll be telling us that, all British people can go and work over in the Alps. Final listener, thank you for joining us. And until next time, goodbye.